Well, international affairs commentator Doug Herbert is with me here on set. Doug, Joe Kent going, highly public defection. How significant do you think it is, both for Donald Trump and indeed for his whole MAGA movement?
Significant because of who he was and his position and what he had access to, i.e. very high-quality real-time intelligence. He was in an office that you might not have even heard of. You've probably never heard his name, Stuart, if I were betting man here.
Probably.
Or yesterday. He was, his National Counterterrorism Center basically was under the aegis of the Office of National Intelligence, which is headed by his boss, Tulsi Gabbard, a MAGA diehard Trump loyalist if ever there was one. And it basically gleans together specialists from a whole bunch of agencies, right, including the FBI, including the CIA, including the Department of Defense, including the Department of Homeland Security. They all come together and they give sort of an amalgam, if you will, of intelligence threads to try to get a good analysis. So he knew what was going on, presumably as best as anyone in the top ranks of the U.S. intelligence community. So when he says that there was no imminent threat on the eve of the war, that is something that Republicans and even his critics in the Democratic camp, and he had no shortage of those critics, are taking seriously. Look, this is a man, like I said, who did not exactly have a good reputation among Democrats. Shortly after he was confirmed, one Democrat said, basically that this guy was a conspiracy-wielding white supremacist. This is a guy who believed the two 2020 elections were stolen. He believes that the FBI may have had a hand in orchestrating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He's a guy who thinks that Joe Biden's COVID health chief, Anthony Fauci, should be tried for murder. All of these things. He's an arch conspiracy guy. He is MAGA if ever there was MAGA, at the center of what's called the MAGA-verse. But this is what I'm saying. They all agree on one thing. Whether you're his harshest critic or a Republican who sort of, respected what he did, you say that when he says that he saw no imminent threat of intelligence, that's something that is going to make you sit up and take notice. Like I said, he saw the real-time intelligence. He wrote in his resignation he could not, with a clear conscience, support this war with Iran. And he saw Donald Trump having taken that decision to go to war, contrary to what Donald Trump's communications people and his inner circle have said. He sees that Donald Trump was brought to war under a lot of pressure by what he said were high-ranking Israeli officials and, quote, influential members of the American media. So he was also taking a swipe at journalists along the way.
So that no imminent threat claim, others, even outside as well, the U.S., certainly agreeing with that.
Yeah. First of all, the inside the U.S., Richard Blumenthal, who is a senator from Washington, a senator who sits on the Armed Services Committee. He's been to a lot of briefings, closed briefings, that we don't know what's happening inside, about this intelligence on the Iran war. And he says he's come away from those briefings with more questions than answers. And he says that he sees, in his judgment, he has no evidence of an imminent threat. But what's more interesting is the Guardian newspaper in Britain has revealed that Britain's top national security advisor, the man with access, Jonathan Powell, actually attended the final talks between the U.S. and Iran on the eve of the February 28th strikes. And what he came away from those briefings, and he was there with a small clutch of technical nuclear experts that he brought along, British experts. What he came away with was a sense that there was a real significant offer from Tehran on the table, not perfect, still a lot of outstanding questions about access to nuclear sites by inspectors, so on and so forth, but saying that he believes that the offer put on the table by Iran was good enough, surprisingly good enough and significant enough to prevent a rush to war. In other words, an intelligence expert, security advisor outside the U.S. who was in a party to those talks, and this reporting was confirmed by 3 high-level sources to the Guardian newspaper, he says there was no need to rush to war. He's basically corroborating what Joe Kent said in his resignation letter, no imminent threat.
What about Donald Trump, his reaction to all this?
Lashing out, as he does. If someone dares to dissent from Donald Trump, dares to put a kink in his armor, dares to threaten his ego, his vanity, his ambitions, his transactional, brilliant, genius, deal-making genius. Anyone who dares to criticize that or puncture a hole in it or suggest that there's something a little off in his reasoning or his motives, you are privy to a full-on, full frontal assault, not just from Donald Trump, but those in his inner orbit still who tend to circle the wagons. Remember, he has said that, he seemed like a nice guy, thought he was a nice guy, but he's always been weak on security. So the first reaction has been to sort of chip away at his credibility, character assassination, reputational assassination. Others in the Republican ranks, full diehard MAGA supporters, because Joe Kent said that Donald Trump, in his view, was pressured by Israel, Israeli lobbies. They're trying to cast this as anti-Semitism, so saying you have an anti-Semite, basically. They're trying to basically do reputational damage and so much denigrate his credibility as to, negate anything he says. But the fact of the matter, even the critics know that he saw the intelligence, he was there. There's only so much character assassination you can do. But the Donald Trump basic instinct, the default option is to someone criticizes you, someone questions your judgment or your reasoning or your motives, you destroy them, you destroy their reputation, you do a tag team effort among everyone in that MAGA orbit. The only problem is there are a lot of people now in that MAGAverse that are willing to talk back, including some big influencers such as Tucker Carlson, not a high-level intelligence official, someone outside there, but someone who has millions and millions of people who follow him loyally and listen to what he says.
Doug, thanks very much, Doug Herbert, our international affairs commentator here on France 24.